Hello, and welcome to Experience Week. We are excited to have you with us today. This presentation is titled Leadership Development, the Move to More Rigorous, Structured, and Scientific Approaches by Anthony Abatello from Deloitte. Before we jump into content, some quick housekeeping items. Feel free to share this event with your colleagues. It's not too late to register. Second, let others know you are watching by tweeting at Qualtrics with hashtag Experience Week. And last, all the content from today is available on demand. Enjoy. The time is now yours, Anthony.
So what I plan to cover today is four major topics. One is on, what does next generation leadership development look like? Two, about engaging the modern leader. So how do we engage with them and drive accelerated development? How you measure, which is always important part, and leave you with some questions and thoughts for that we typically get around these types of discussions. So the first that I wanted to start with is, leadership is a top business issue. So as many of you know, we run the largest longitudinal human capital trends review across the globe. And every year, leadership continues to be a pervasive issue for business and HR leaders. And it's continuously getting worse. So, 89% of our clients view leadership as a high priority and a pervasive issue. It was 87% in 2015. It was 89% this year. And as you go down, you'll see, they see that leadership challenge is important, but, 28% report weak or very weak leadership pipelines, or even worse, only 13% really see themselves as excellent at building global leaders. So, the leadership investments are not getting the results that clients want, and mainly we see this because one, it's this idea of heroes, myths, legends, fads that are driving leadership development. It's one of the most published topics around the globe, and clients continue to buy the fad versus actually investing in a scientific or rigorous approach. And many times, ex-CEOs, they retire, they write a book, and now everyone's really excited about it, but it's not actually driving the result or building the business capability. The second is about positional leadership. It's really no longer valid. Just because you get promoted into a role, now you're considered a leader, and that's where you get developed. It's really about finding and identifying those high potential leaders. This network of team concept is requiring more leaders and more ready now leaders in the organization. So as organizations flatten out, as we take more agile approaches in the organization, we have more networks of teams, and leaders are required to influence at a different level. And then this idea of this leadership cliff meets the leadership jumps. So we have, many baby boomers who post, the economic downturn in 2008, 2009, who stayed in the market longer than had expected. What happens is there's just not enough human beings to take those jobs if they all were to retire in the next 5 years. So this leadership cliff of those leaders retiring meets the jump of millennial leaders not having the same amount of runway to prepare themselves to get the experiences and the exposure required to be successful as a leader. So when you take those two things together and you think about the priority and just that the investment is not paying off, it really takes this idea of a next generation leadership development being important and a move toward a more rigorous, structured, and scientific approach. And business leaders sort of say, well, wait a second, science, why do I need this? I don't want to I don't want something that is too academic, and really that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about putting this being structured and scientific and putting this off in business terms and starting with this question of leadership for what, right? What do we want leadership for? What do we want to invest in leadership for? And, you start with that context, which, could be you're transforming, digital and, really taking a focus on M&A, or you're looking at turnaround in the organization and moving into emerging markets. The point here is that taking a business first approach means we are making it highly relevant and connected to the leader's job. It involves the real context that leaders are dealing with today and the problems that they're trying to solve. So when you see that, those characteristics of contextual or business first leadership, it's high contextual relevance. So meaning it's embedded in the leadership issues and challenges of today's industry or the company's issues. We say logged on versus logged off. So logged on meaning, leadership development interventions that, they tend to be these lofty, send people to these Japanese Zen gardens, and resorts for development, which are great for the mind and needed for personal investment in giving the leader a break. But it takes them away from the issues that they deal with. So we often talk about the difference of the Japanese Zen garden is where we send people for leadership development, but really where they're actually leading is in the streets of Calcutta. And we need to be able to bring those two together, and that's what we call the idea of logged on leadership. Real challenges and developing leaders in real challenges versus made up ones. So I always joke with my team and our clients even that, leaders of today have enough problems on their own. We don't need to create action learning projects or business simulation examples, for them to learn from. We actually have their real challenges of today, and we need to develop them in those real challenges. So, seeing that, and again, having those real issues and developing leaders in those real issues is what's important. So that context also drives us to ask, the hard questions around, when you think about those business events. So, leadership for what? It might be preparing, succession for future leaders. It might be, looking at the talent reviews or the pipeline that we have. They have to ask those hard questions around, who should be on the succession list, not just, who's the right person to be on that list, not just the person who's, the direct report of that leader today. How do we measure high potential? By making it relevant and anchored in context, we arrive at the critical questions that then can inform where we place our development bets, so where we're going to put that investment. So, if we're thinking about business transformation, we might want to know who's the right leader to lead the transformation, but who's also the right leader to lead that new organization. They may not be the same person because disruptors, change leaders, are constantly thinking about new ways to break glass, whereas those that run and operate the organization need to think about influence and inspiration and executing the business strategy overall. So asking yourself those hard questions really helps make sure that you have the right context for the leaders that you're developing. So, when we look at, at leaders, and what's the idea of what leaders need to do, it's this idea of laser focus versus a broad brush. Most companies have competency models that are just, like the Encyclopedia Britannica, right? They don't have that real focus around what a leader needs to be. And our research says that the most effective leaders focus on four things. They focus on, one, how do I run the business? What does the business need? And being focused on the business. Two is about people in my organization. How do I influence people? How do I drive the talent agenda and develop people to do what they need to do to drive the business strategy? The third is being an entrepreneur, right? How do I think of new ideas? How am I coming up with new concepts and rapidly prototyping? And then four is how do I effectively build and manage relationships across the organization? So when you're developing those, you're placing those bets, you really need to be focused on what are the mission-critical capabilities that will drive the most value, not on that wide set of unrelated competencies. And so when you break that down, so what it really means is finding those leadership capabilities that matter most and then putting them in that leader's context. So what we find is, now, when I look at those four areas, that there is a leadership capability that underpins all of those. So, with running the business, it's providing vision and direction, or, showing commercial acumen as a business leader. For people, it will be, getting people to achieve the results in the organization and being able to inspire them, getting them to follow you. For entrepreneurship, it's, do I have that competitive edge? Am I waking up every morning and thinking about what are my competitors doing? Am I rigorous around how we can innovate in the market? Building talent. So do I have the capabilities in the talent of the organization to drive a competitive advantage? And finally, those relationships is, can I influence? And influence is not just, can I influence the people that work for me? As I become more seniors, can I influence the people that work for me, my colleagues, my peers, and also people that are external to the organization? So, many times, getting into the C-suite means you have to influence external parties that are not in your purview or not in your accountability. And so having an external view of that is important. And collaboration, right? We see a collaboration as most important to drive synergies via partnership, but also just in how work gets done in the organization. And so having a rigorous approach around development, should meet the needs of the individual and of the enterprise, establish the focus, but also, permit external benchmarking for accountability. And what we mean by that is, finding the right ways of activating that in your real business context for the individual. But when we do that, it's developing those critical capabilities as a top business priority, not just a nice to do, and not just because we want to invest in leaders. It's actually to drive the results. So our research shows that, we focus on hands-on development with time spent practicing in that individual leader's context. So the more rigorous and scientific approach will say, right, we've researched the capabilities that are required by all leaders, and that's what I just talked about. But what's now here is about how you can actually develop those individual capabilities. So what we talk about is we spend 80% of the time in development around appraising and actioning that. And so only 20% is about, teaching or about showing how do we activate and acquire the knowledge. So by focusing on those cognitions or those mental models that expert leaders have, we can spend 20% of the time on teaching those mental models of expert leaders around those capabilities, and then spend 80% of the time in actually deepening the appreciation of those situations of how expert leaders apply it, but then actually applying it to my own business challenge or my own scenario that I have today. And why this is important and what really makes this different is that we get to action fast, right? So we've developed this model, this scientific approach, using the cognitions that we've studied through our 25 years of assessment, and creating those mental models, what we call schema, creating those mental models so that you can quickly learn, okay, here's the map, but then you can also use that to apply that anywhere you go into your own situation. So my best example here is the airport. So as a career consultant, I can say that I spend more time in airports probably than I'd like, but the airport is a schema. There is a mental model that I have in the airport that I use anywhere in the world. So if I was trying to explain to someone who has never traveled before, I could easily tell them that there are three things that you're going to need to know when you're in the airport. One is you're going to have to acquire your boarding pass, whether that's through a mobile device or through the kiosk when you arrive in the ticketing area. The second is you're going to have to go through security, and there'll be a process to get through security. And the third is going to be getting to your gate and knowing how to navigate to your gate. So if I take those three things and I say, one, getting your boarding pass, either getting dropped off at ticketing, using a kiosk, seeing an agent, but you'll get that boarding pass. Second is following the signs to security, and knowing that once you get into security, there may be a line, who to get behind, who not to get behind if you have TSA pre-check, so forth. And then the third is navigating to your gate. When you get through security, there's always a kiosk that shows where the gate numbers are, where your destination is. Then you can follow the signs based on the number of your gate and arriving at your gate early enough so that once you arrive, that there's enough ample time to board. Now, I could give you those three pieces of advice as a traveler, and you could take that, and whether you're traveling through Newark or Narita, you could pretty much use those three models or those 3 points to navigate through either airport. And that's what we talk about in the 20%. And that 80% is then saying, okay, now let me think about my home airport. Let me think about Philadelphia or JFK or SFO, right? And how would I use those three in my own context? And we do the same thing in the business. We teach you that mental model, and that rigorous scientific approach to that mental model, and then you apply it in your own business scenario. And that really then underpins how you can drive an accelerated amount of development for those leaders. So when we think about then engaging the modern learner, right? So how do you put it in that leader context first? And it's really putting that context at the center. The first is defining who should be that person or who should be that leader, and it's really understanding that potential and identifying high potential leaders, not high potential talent, means understanding how fast those leaders can develop through those capabilities. So you need to assess the readiness of leaders to grow and change. Otherwise, you'll constantly meet resistance. And so, we've developed our potential model, which sits and supports those leadership capabilities as a way of how quickly they can learn, grow, and transition as the demands of leadership increases. When if it's so important to know who has the potential and that raw material to lead, why don't we get it right? Right? Well, typical measures of today are not working. The first is, the typical measures can confuse performance with potential. So, if you think about, those of you that use 9-box grids, we tend to say that, well, past performance means that someone should be, a leader. And we all know that past performance is not an indicator at all of future potential or leadership potential. Second is, managers' ratings are biased, and a lot of times that managers evaluate potential against their own image, right? And so it's not a malicious thing. It's a human behavior of, I'm going to pick Joe or Jane and say they have a high potential leadership because they remind me of me when I was that age, or they remind me of me when I was in that role, or they remind me of me when I was faced with that similar challenge. And so when you shape it in your own image, you tend to have higher bias. And when managers use ratings, that are, or managers often assume that ratings are objective if they are numerical, meaning if I use a Likert scale or I use a 9-box grid that says, A3, that they are objective because they're numeric, and they're not. It's still that same bias that exists in that in that self-image as well. So, if you think about that, you're stuck with different types of potential factors that are out there that don't actually drive the results. So when you have when you can separate between high potential versus slower potential, because again, for us, potential doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a better leader or you are a better leader. Potential means how fast you can develop. So if you have those with slower potential, what do you do with them, right? Do you stop developing them? And absolutely not. What you do need to do with slower potential individuals around leadership is you have to provide them with a viable career path. You have to give them greater expertise and knowledge so that they can develop at their path. And a lot of times that comes with networking, or it comes with building depth in the organization. And a lot of times that is, developing them in their thing, right? So, maybe they're that functional leader, or they're that, that leader that is that is a leader of individual contributors, right? Like engineers, for example, they love to code and they continue to perform. They may only want to lead other engineers or other coders, right? They may not want to be the next, Mark Zuckerberg. They may just want to be the person that comes up with new innovative product, and that's their thing. And so developing them still in that context and not leaving them alone is still important. So, when you know that you're ready to develop and that they have the potential, then you need to focus on the engagement of those individuals. So what can you do? Part of that is, engaging those leaders with high potential in leadership development, is gamifying real life, right? One way around that is engaging them in a way that, they're using augmented reality or virtual reality in a world that gets them to interact with customers or gets them to interact with other individuals within the organization. So not just gamifying because it's cool, but actually because it actually presents, a real world. Getting them exposure to real stakeholders. So whether you think of, the sort of frontline leader who may be, new into the role and managing for the first time, and getting them to engage with real stakeholders of who they would be leading with or who their peers would be, all the way up to those that are entering into the C-suite. So you think about CFOs or CMOs that need to engage with the external world. So it might be institutional investors or regulators or gaining greater customer intimacy, right? Getting them to engage with those stakeholders is important. The third one is we call actual wicked problems, getting them to solve real problems of today. Again, not making something up that's just, a case study, but getting them to actually solve problems and work together and learn from that problem and iterating or rapid prototyping with it. Immersive learning. So we are big fans. In our research, we have found that taking leaders out. So not just the concept of the fish in the fishbowl, not just taking the fish out of the fishbowl, bringing them to a new environment and cleaning the fish and then bringing them back to the dirty fishbowl, taking and cleaning the fish and the fishbowl at the same time. So immersing both in the world of what their problems are, what their environment is, and working on the organizational culture around that, so that they're immersed in learning in those different types of contexts. And, a lot of that really can be, effectively integrating that leader's work into the development intervention, making it risky, making it real, and what we say is unboring, right? Just getting them to be excited about what they can learn. So when we look into actual change and how you can actually go beyond the classroom to provide a holistic view of what that can mean, we use the 4E models from our person research specifically on leadership. So number one is setting the expectations, right? Having a framework that is evidence-based, that is benchmarked, that you can say this is what is expected of leaders. We like the elegantly simple approach that we've developed because it encompasses every leadership. I'm sure if anyone listening to this, if you go back to that page around our capabilities, you'll see that pretty much it covers everything you could possibly imagine a leader would need. So starting with that's evidence-based, that's scientific, that has that benchmark behind it, and setting the expectation of what that leader needs to be or what that leader needs to know to be successful. And the second is, what do your leaders need to be the best at? So building that expertise and those capabilities that are the highest priority for you and your business. Not just, we want every leader to have this skill. It's we need this capability to drive the future of our business. The third is around experiences. So, what are the experiences that leaders need to accelerate their development? So it might be, having a global role, running a P&L, managing, a diverse team or managing multiple functions. All of that together is important for leaders to have in the future. And designing those experiences that offer the leaders, the diversity they need. And the last is exposure. So what ideas could change the way your leaders think, immersing them and getting them external exposure into environments, whether that's from other leaders, from luminaries, from futurists, from other sector leaders, from other non-sectors, outside of your organizational, your industry, that you can learn from to understand about innovation, to understand about, industries that come at the intersection, right? Who would have thought that, Uber would be now at the intersection of many different industries, not just about moving cars or having taxis, or the Airbnb concept that has the largest number of rooms in the globe but doesn't own a single property, right? So how this can really change these different industries, and really at the same time how it allows for them to think differently as leaders. Engaging with relevance and variety. When we think of talking about the environment for development, is eliminate the safe space. Get out of the Japanese Zen garden and make it high stakes. Get into the streets of Calcutta, right? And figure out what are the right interventions that will drive that. So, whether it's, leaders as teachers, learning from other leaders inside and outside the organization, market immersions, learning from the industry, other sectors, finding where those intersections are for your leaders and other industries that could drive a great collaboration or future supply chain. peer coaching, feedback and coaching, individual application, how I can take what I'm learning and bring it to solving a problem in my organization specifically. So, and then, also those mental models or those cognitive approaches, finding those ways of applying that to build the expertise of your leaders. And so, getting them with the leader at the center, engaging with them. So, new ways of thinking, high stakes exposure where they're having to present new ideas or they're actually having to come up with new prototypes that, could make or break. And being immersive, having real problems and being collaborative and inclusive with a diverse group of leaders so that they can learn from each other, they can rapidly prototype together, and they can challenge. We love the idea of the hackathon and creating ideas and then bringing direct reports in to hack it and say where can it not work and refining the idea at a real clip. So the last piece, we want to talk about is just around, rigorous measurement, and when you think about development, did it really matter in your organization? How do you do that? And the first is moving beyond basic levels of measurement, which is, did I like the developmental program that I went to? Right. All that does is say, smile sheets and participant satisfaction is great and net promoter scores are wonderful, but it doesn't tell you anything about, did the intervention actually develop the leader? Did we clean the fish or did we clean the fish and the bowl? So all it tells you is, do I have a happy fish? And so, did they really learn something? And, ultimately, who cares, right? Did they learn it, and did it actually have an impact? Did their behavior change, right? Did the leader performance improve? Ultimately, was there a business impact? Did we see, I had one financial services client that said, that after 2 years of a development intervention of their senior most leaders, said that they had the highest equity growth for the organization globally. And they attributed that to the development of the senior leaders in the organization. That's business impact. And that is what you're ultimately trying to accomplish, is that you have the business impact. That's the missing link, not just, is it good on an individual level that the leader performance increased, but that they actually had, business impact overall. So, they have to build the business while they build the bench and, measuring that outcome on two levels. So, one is that they have stronger ready now bench, which means they have stronger leadership that have the capabilities that are required, but they also have stronger transformational capabilities. So we have leadership leaders who can challenge the status quo, that can drive innovation, but also that they can look at the business outcomes. So what are we looking for in the business that we can impact through leadership development? So it might be customer outcomes. Did we have greater customer centricity? Were we having, greater high top line growth? Operational efficiencies. Were we able to transform the business to achieve that outcome? So, looking at those, at the same time, having more context means more relevant measurement for those leaders. So, what are some approaches, rigor when experimental control isn't possible? So one is, identifying variables that can predict business outcomes. So, you see that in here. We talk about an example of a store run by a manager, retained through his fourth year, earns $500,000 more revenue than a store run by a first-year manager, right? And so finding those examples and seeing that business outcome and what they could get over time. The second is, tailoring leadership development to help influence those variables, training those third-year managers, right, to improve the engagement, or train the managers to engage or motivate or develop earlier in their careers. The third is measuring the impact, right? So if the leader lasts longer and revenue holds up, there is an argument that can be made that the outcomes are tied to leadership development efforts and the investment that you're making, because you're seeing the retention and you're seeing the growth earlier in their career. So it's an easy way of tying that. If we're going to invest in the second or the third year managers, and we're able to capture that revenue earlier within that retail operation, that's real results. And I know many retail leaders or many consumer product leaders that will say being able to impact human capital or drive results in human capital is the job of the leader in the organization, not just about merchandising or visuals or about sales. It's about human capital management. So that's where we'll close today in moving from rigorous approaches and scientific approaches and how it can drive. The most important thing I want to leave you with today is that understanding that it doesn't have to be academic, that this is about using elegantly simple capabilities of leaders that are benchmarked, that you have real ways of identifying potential and who you should invest in, and using a rigorous approach to measuring the development outcomes that are tied to your business, not just to training programs. So I'll close it there and say thank you for those that are listening and have tuned in today. Hopefully you'll find this as interesting and really thought-provoking around how you can impact the future leaders of your organization.
Thanks, Anthony. That was fantastic. And thanks to all of you for joining today. Tune in for the rest of Experience Week for more great content.